I was 74 years old when my son-in-law told me, in front of my own daughter, that my heart medication was a luxury the family could no longer afford. He slid the pharmacy receipt across the dinner table like a verdict. $240. He called me a burden. He called me a drain. What he did not know, what no one at that table knew, was that the house we were sitting in, the firm whose name was on his business card, and the 12 acres of Cape Cod salt marsh he was secretly trying to sell were all already mine. They had been mine for 30 years. By the time he understood that, he was standing in a parking lot in the rain with no car, no cards, and nowhere to go. And I was watching the last of his world close from a kitchen window in Wellfleet, with a cup of coffee and nothing left to prove. Before I go further, let me know where you are listening from tonight. Drop the name of your town in the comments. Some moments ahead have been dramatized for storytelling. The lesson behind every word is real. The receipt hit the table with the dry, flat sound of a courtroom gavel. I remember that sound more clearly than anything else from that night. Caroline had served a roast chicken she picked up from a market on her way home from the dental clinic. The chicken was dry. The Sancerre Trevor had opened to make a point tasted of disappointment. I was wearing the same brown cardigan I had worn to every Sunday dinner for 6 years. It had a small mend at each elbow, where Eleanor had patched it the winter before she died. Trevor stood at the head of the table the way a small man stands when he has rehearsed his moment in a mirror. He was 47. He wore a Hugo Boss jacket over an open collar. The watch on his wrist was a counterfeit Patek Philippe. He believed many things about me that I had quietly arranged for him to believe. "Walter," he said. He never called me Dad. "We need to have a real conversation. A man your age should be grateful for what he has, not running up bills the family is expected to absorb." I folded my napkin. I did not look at the receipt. I looked at my daughter instead. Caroline was 45 years old, and she had her mother's eyes. She had also, for 15 years, had a husband who had taught her how not to use them. She set her wineglass down without taking a sip. She did not look at me. That was how I knew she had heard this speech in private, and had agreed not to interrupt it. It is heart medication, Trevor," I said, in the same voice I had once used to explain a load-bearing wall to a junior architect who was about to cut through it with a circular saw. "It is not a luxury. It is the reason I am sitting at this table." "That is exactly what I mean," Trevor said. He held the receipt between 2 fingers like it was something unclean. $240 a month. For pills. There are programs for people in your situation. People in my situation. I let the phrase rest a moment. In Trevor's mind, it meant people who took the bus, ate canned soup, and did not interfere with the ambitions of their betters. I had spent 10 years curating exactly that impression. I had driven a 1991 Volvo with 1 broken taillight. I had paid for my groceries in cash. And it had bought me the only thing worth buying: the truth about the man my daughter had married. Across the table, my granddaughter Maddie sat very still. She was 16. She had a quiet, watchful face that reminded me of Eleanor more every year. She was holding a fork above her plate, frozen, the way a deer freezes when it hears a branch crack on the wrong side of a clearing. She was not looking at her father. She was looking at me. For 1 suspended second, before she lowered her eyes, I saw something in her expression I had not expected. It was not pity. It was patience. The patience of someone who had been waiting for me to arrive at a conclusion she had reached a long time ago. I tucked that look away in the quiet drawer where I kept everything else worth keeping. A man your age should be grateful, Trevor repeated, because he had not received the reaction he wanted. Caroline and I have been carrying you for years. The car, the medical, the little extras. We are not made of money. I almost laughed. The sound got as far as my throat, and then I shut it down. Because a laugh wouldn't have given away the only advantage I still had. The dining room had been built to my specifications, paid for from a trust Trevor had never heard of. The firm on his business card was a 2-room office kept alive by Carolyn's salary and a line of credit he had quietly drained without telling her, and 12 acres of salt marsh on the outer arm of Cape Cod, the only patch of ground on this earth where my son lay buried in everything except name, had been the subject of 3 discreet inquiries from a development firm last quarter. I did not yet know the buyer was Trevor's idea. I would within 72 hours. I stood up from the table. Caroline finally looked at me then, and her eyes were wet. And she did not say a word. I will take a walk before dessert, I said. Excuse me. I stepped out onto the porch. The autumn air was cold and clean and smelled of wet leaves and wood smoke from a neighbor's chimney. I closed the door behind me and stood looking at the yellow light pouring through the dining room window onto the lawn. Inside that light, 3 people were eating a meal they believed they had earned. I was not angry. I was something quieter and far more dangerous than angry. That was the night I decided to stop being patient. The next 48 hours would teach my son-in-law what a real architect can build, and what he can dismantle. The next morning began the way every morning of the last 10 years had begun. I came down at 6:45 in my flannel robe, ground the coffee beans Eleanor had taught me to grind, and stood at the kitchen window watching the maples in the backyard let go of another night's worth of leaves. The light was pale and gray. There was frost on the railing. I was lifting my mug to my mouth when Trevor walked into the kitchen. He was already dressed for whatever performance he had scheduled that day. The Hugo Boss jacket, the open collar, a pair of leather brogues that squeaked faintly because he had not yet broken them in. He did not say good morning. He walked straight past me to the small ceramic dish on the counter where I kept my keys. He picked up the keys to my Volvo. Then he picked up the spare house key. Then he opened the drawer beneath the dish and took out the small brass key to the desk in my study. He held all 3 sets in his hand and turned to face me. Walter, he said, Caroline and I have decided. You are not going to be driving anymore. It is a safety issue. I set the coffee down. I did not let my hand shake. Although in the role I had been playing for 10 years, a small tremor would have been appropriate. I had grown careless. I corrected it the next moment by letting my fingers rest a little uncertainly on the rim of the mug. I have an appointment at Dr. Hadley's office at 3, I said. And I volunteer at the library on Tuesdays. You can use Uber, Trevor said. Or Caroline can drive you when she is free. We just think it is time. The other night, at dinner, you forgot where you put your reading glasses. Twice. I had not forgotten anything. I had moved my reading glasses myself, on purpose, from the kitchen counter to the small table in the hall. I had been seeding the ground for 10 months. Apparently the seeds had begun to come up exactly where I had planted them. I let my face fall into a slow, mild bewilderment. I do not recall that, I said. No. Trevor said gently. He could not quite keep the satisfaction out of his voice. I know you do not. Carolyn came down the stairs then, already in her scrubs. She would not meet my eyes. "Daddy," she said, "maybe just for a few weeks, until we get you in to see someone." "Someone," I said. "A specialist," she said. "Trevor knows of a very good one." I did not look at Trevor. The 3 keys had already been transferred to the inside pocket of his jacket. He patted the pocket once, lightly, the way a man pats his wallet to make sure it is still there. "All right, Caroline," I said. "I will take the bus." Trevor smiled. He liked it when I cooperated. It made his story cleaner. "That is the spirit," he said. He picked up his own keys to the leased Porsche Cayenne. "And Walter, do not touch the thermostat while we are out. The bill last month was insane." He left. The front door clicked. A moment later, the engine of the Porsche purred to life and receded down the street. Caroline did not leave right away. She stood at the counter with her back to me, her shoulders pulled in tight. "Daddy, I am sorry about last night. He gets stressed about money." "I am sure he does," I said. She turned. Her eyes were red around the edges. "I love you," she said. "I love you too, sweetheart," I said. I meant it. I have always meant it. That has been the trouble. She went out the back door. I watched her pull away from the kitchen window. Then I finished my coffee in the silence of a kitchen that had just been quietly stripped of its locks. I went upstairs and dressed in my oldest tweed jacket. I put on the wool cap Eleanor had given me for my 60th birthday. I picked up my canvas tote bag, which contained nothing more interesting than a library book and a roll of breath mints. And then I walked out the front door and down to the corner of Maple Street, where the number 64 bus would arrive at 7:41. The morning was bright and cold. The wind came down the hill from the church and pushed brittle yellow leaves along the gutter. My left knee, which had not bothered me much for a year, decided that today was a good day to remind me it existed. While I was waiting, my phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number, but I recognized the area code. Maddie. It read only Grandpa. "Dad seemed off this morning. Are you okay?" I read it twice. I did not answer right away. I tucked the phone back into my pocket. The bus came. I paid my fare in coins from the leather pouch in my bag and sat near the back. A woman with a stroller smiled at me, the smile a person gives an old man on a bus on a cold morning. I returned it. There is a particular humiliation in being driven slowly past a thing you own by someone who does not know you own it. There is a quieter humiliation still in choosing to be driven that way, because the day will come when the lesson will land harder for the people who watched. I had chosen the quieter one for 10 years. I was choosing it for one final morning. I would not need a number 64 bus much longer. I lifted the phone and answered Maddie with one word: soon. For 10 years, I had played the part of a man with no power. The bus turned onto the main road and headed downtown. I leaned my head against the cool glass of the window. It was time to remember what real power felt like. The bus let me off at Boylston and Clarendon at 8:20. The wind off the Charles was sharp enough to find every gap in my tweed jacket. I walked 2 blocks to an address on Newberry Street with my head down. An old man on an errand he had probably already forgotten. The building had a brass plaque so small you could miss it if you blinked. Sullivan and Associates, Private Counsel. There was no public floor. The entrance was a single oak door with a brushed steel keypad. I punched in a 7-digit code I had not used in 9 months. The lock clicked. The young man in the lobby nodded without speaking and stepped aside as I crossed to the private elevator. Inside the car, between the lobby and 23, I removed the wool cap. I slipped off the tweed jacket and replaced it with the charcoal suit jacket I had folded into the bottom of the canvas tote that morning. I took a Hermes tie from the inside pocket and knotted it with the kind of speed that comes from 40 years of doing the same motion in the dark. I traded my $15 Timex for a Patek Philippe from 1969. The real one. Mine. When the elevator doors opened, the man who stepped out was not the man who had ridden up. Margaret Sullivan was waiting in the corridor. She was 62. Iron gray hair cut short, black wool suit, former federal prosecutor, Eastern District. She had been my counsel for 23 years. She did not smile. Mag did not smile when she saw anyone, which was one of the many reasons I trusted her. "Walter," she said. "Coffee is in the conference room. Single malt is in the cabinet. I have laid both out, because I cannot tell yet which kind of meeting this is." "Both, then," I said. She poured a small measure of Macallan into 2 glasses and slid one across the table. "Tell me what happened." I told her about the receipt at Sunday dinner, about Trevor taking the 3 keys this morning, about Caroline standing in the kitchen with her back turned, about 10 years of careful seeding, and how I now believed the seeds had begun to come up in the wrong garden. Mag listened without interrupting. When I finished, she opened the folder in front of her and slid it toward me. "I have been watching him for 6 months," she said. "You asked me to keep an eye on Trevor's accounts after he tried to draw against Caroline's trust last spring. Walter, what I have is bad. Worse than bad." I opened the folder. Whitmore Capital Partners was a single rented office with 2 desks and a shared receptionist 3 blocks away. Its declared revenue last year was $220,000. Its expenses were almost 4 times that. I turned the page. A transfer record from 11 months ago. $380,000 had been moved out of Caroline's personal trust account, the one her grandmother had set up on her 21st birthday, routed through a Shell LLC in Delaware to an account belonging to Trevor. $380,000, I said. Caroline does not know. She last opened her statement 2 years ago. He covered it by forging her electronic signature on the withdrawal request. He did this. Walter, not her. I closed the folder. I picked up the whiskey but did not drink it. "I want to know everything first," I said. "I need to know if my daughter is a participant in any of this, or if she is a victim. I will not move on her husband until I am certain." "Understood. And the Cape Cod parcel," I said. "The 12 acres at Wellfleet." Mag paused. She had drafted the original deed 30 years ago, and the holding trust the year after Eleanor died. She knew exactly what those 12 acres were. 3 inquiries in the last quarter, she said. All routed through a single broker named Beacon Coastline. The buyer has not been named in writing yet. I will know by Friday. Pull on every thread. I want the buyer. I want the offer. I want the calendar of every meeting Trevor has taken outside his office in the last 6 months. I want the woman. If there is a woman, there is usually a woman. There is usually a woman. Mag agreed. I stood and walked to the window. The marsh. I thought of all the things he might have reached for. He had reached for the marsh. For 35 years, I had not been able to bring myself to walk those 12 acres in summer. The water at Wellfleet had taken my son on a July afternoon in 1989. Daniel was 7 years old. He had been wearing a red life vest we had bought a week earlier. The wave had been higher than any wave the locals could remember. The land we had bought 4 years before he was born became, on that afternoon, the only grave my boy had ever been given. I turned from the window. Mag was watching me the way she always watched me when she could see I was about to make a decision that would not be reversible. Mag, if he is trying to sell those 12 acres, I will not just stop him. I will make sure no one can ever try again. Understood. Friday. I went down in the elevator, between 23 and the lobby. I put the tweed jacket back on, restored the Timex to my wrist, and pulled the wool cap low. By the time the doors opened on the ground floor, I was once again a retired man who had wandered into a building he was not supposed to be in. I walked out onto Newbury Street and turned toward the Boston Public Library. I would, after all, return one book. I had walked in as a man with shaking hands. I walked out as a man with a target, and a question my daughter would not want me to ask. The bus home left at 11:15. I arrived home at noon to find the house exactly as I had left it. Trevor's Porsche was gone. Caroline's car was gone. The thermostat had been turned down to 60 degrees, presumably to make a point. I turned it back up to 68, made a sandwich with the bread and turkey that were mine to eat in a refrigerator that was mine to open, and ate standing at the counter, which Eleanor had always scolded me for. Old habits. That afternoon, I sat in the small armchair by the guest room window and read. It was a history of the Shaker furniture movement I had been working through for a month. The Shakers had understood something most architects still struggle with, which is that a chair is a moral statement as much as a structural one. I read until the light changed, and the maple in the front yard went from gold to orange to gray. At 6 o'clock, I heard a key in the front door. Trevor and Caroline came in together. Trevor was on his phone. Caroline carried 2 bags of groceries and set them on the kitchen counter without asking for help. Maddie came in behind them, backpack over one shoulder, earbuds in. She walked past the kitchen, past the living room, and stopped for just a moment at the door of the guest room where I was sitting. She looked at me. She reached into the front pocket of her backpack and held out a small, folded square of paper between 2 fingers. Then she put her earbuds back in and walked upstairs. I waited until I heard her bedroom door close. Then I unfolded the paper on my knee. It was a billing statement. Healy Neurological Associates. Patient name Walter G. Brennan. Service Comprehensive Cognitive Assessment Series. 4 sessions. Total billed $75,000. Remittance to a post office box in Cambridge. I had never been inside Healy Neurological Associates. I had never met a Dr. Healy. I had never agreed to any cognitive assessment. On the 3rd reading, I noticed a small notation in the lower right corner, the kind that appears on internal copies rather than patient-facing documents. It read per engagement agreement. Ref. T.W. Trevor Whitmore. I folded the paper carefully and put it in the inside pocket of my cardigan. Then I went to my desk, opened the bottom drawer, and took out the satellite phone I had kept there for 3 years without needing it. I dialed. The billing statement is for $75,000, I said without introduction. It references Trevor Whitmore by initials. The clinic is called Healy Neurological Associates. The service description is a cognitive assessment series. Mag was quiet for 4 seconds. I counted. I have heard of Healy, she said. He was investigated by the Massachusetts Medical Board in 2019 for billing irregularities. The case was dropped. I will have a full file on him by morning. I want to know where the $75,000 came from. I want to know if it was wired, and from what account. I will trace it tonight, she said. I put the phone back in the drawer and went to the kitchen, where Caroline was making dinner. She was slicing vegetables, her hands moving with the focus of someone who needed them busy. I poured 2 glasses of water and set one near her elbow. How was your day, Daddy? Quiet, I said. Yours? Long? I had a difficult patient, a man who kept insisting he knew better than I did what was wrong with his own teeth. She almost smiled. Some men are like that. Some men are. I agreed. I sat down at the table. After a moment, she spoke again, without looking up from the cutting board. Daddy, Dr. Healy's office called the clinic today. They want to schedule a follow-up for you. They said you had agreed to a second series. I kept my voice easy. Did they say what it was for? A continuation of your cognitive workup? She paused. The knife stopped moving. Do you remember going to see Dr. Healy last month? I looked at my hands on the table. An old man's hands. Spotted, veined, slightly stiff in the mornings. Hands that had drawn hundreds of buildings and signed thousands of documents and held my son under the water at Wellfleet until the Coast Guard came and told me to let go. I arranged my face into the look of mild and honest confusion I had been practicing for 10 months. I am not sure, I said. Was I supposed to? Caroline set down the knife. She stood for a moment with her back to me, shoulders pulled in tight, like a coat gathered against cold. It is all right, she said quietly. The careful cheerfulness was gone from her voice. Nothing to worry about. That was how I knew she believed it. I went to my room after dinner. I sat on the edge of the bed in the dark and thought about a doctor who had billed $75,000 to assess a patient he had never met. I thought about the initials in the lower right corner. I thought about the look on Maddie's face in the doorway, the look of someone who had been carrying a piece of information long enough that the weight of it had begun to show. At 9:20, the satellite phone buzzed. A message from Mag. Healy received a wire of $75,000 from a Delaware LLC, same LLC that received the $380 from Caroline's trust. Source traces to Trevor Whitmore. Will have full documentation by morning. Walter, this is not carelessness. This is a plan. I read the message twice. I already knew that. I had known it from the moment I read the billing statement. What I had not known until this evening was whether my daughter knew too. Her voice at the cutting board had told me. She did not know. That changed everything. And it changed nothing. I typed back one word to Mag. Friday. Then I turned off the satellite phone, lay back on the bed, and looked at the ceiling in the dark for a long time. Tuesday morning I took the number 64 bus again, in the same tweed jacket, with the same canvas tote. The transformation in the elevator took 45 seconds. By the time I stepped out on 23, the cardigan was gone, and the Patek was on my wrist, and Mag was waiting with James Okafor and Rebecca Chen already seated at the conference table. James Okafor had been the operational backbone of Brennan and Associates for 17 years. He was 52, broad-shouldered, quiet in the way that competent men are quiet. He had known me since I hired him out of a Boston Lagos architectural exchange program in 2007. He did not need explanations. Rebecca Chen was 45 and had been our chief financial officer for 9 years, recruited from a forensic accounting firm. She understood money the way a surgeon understands anatomy, not just where it was, but where it was supposed to be, and what it meant when it was somewhere else. I sat at the head of the table. Mag poured coffee. "Start with what Trevor knows about the firm," I said. James opened his laptop. "Nothing. You are listed as a retired partner on the public filings. Your name appears in the 1989 founding documents and nowhere else. As far as any public record is concerned, Brennan and Associates has been majority owned by a private equity holding company called Harwick Group since 2004. Harwick is, of course, a wholly owned subsidiary of Brennan Holdings Trust. Trevor has never inquired about Harwick, not once. As far as I can tell, he does not know you own the building his office is in. Ignorance is a thing you can use if you have been careful enough to cultivate it." "Rebecca," I said, "walk me through Trevor." She opened her binder to the first tab and turned it to face me. The numbers told a story that was both simple and grim. Trevor had started Whitmore Capital with $200,000 of Caroline's money, transferred without her knowledge in the first year of their marriage. His declared revenues since then could not be traced to any actual completed transaction. His expenses were meticulous. Hotels, restaurants, a wardrobe budget that ran to $14,000 a year. And beginning approximately 3 years ago, a series of transfers to a development project in Miami, Florida. "Tell me about Florida," I said. She turned to the next tab. In 2022, Trevor invested $1.8 million in a condominium development in Miami-Dade County. The developer had 2 previous projects on record, one of which went into receivership. Trevor raised the $1.8 million by drawing against Caroline's trust and a line of credit in the name of Whitmore Capital. The project broke ground in March of 2023. She paused. Hurricane Hilary made landfall in August. The site flooded. The developer declared force majeure. The LLC dissolved. Trevor lost everything he had put in. $1.8 million, I said. 1.4 of which belonged to other people, including $400,000 from a private investor group with connections to organized crime in the Tampa area. Those investors have been looking for Trevor for 14 months. I sat with that for a moment. A man drowning in a hole he had dug in Florida, reaching up with both hands to grab the only thing within reach. My daughter's trust. My daughter's father. "The Cape Cod parcel," I said. Rebecca turned another tab. The 3 inquiries all came from a broker named Raymond Foss in Hyannis, working on behalf of Hartwell Development. They build mixed-use luxury residential projects here in Boston. The principal is a man named Stephen Hartwell, 61, with strong connections to the state legislature. She slid a printed page across the table. "This is an email from Trevor's personal account to the broker." I read it. It described the Wellfleet parcel as 12 acres of undeveloped coastal land held by an elderly owner with deteriorating cognitive function. It stated that the owner was expected to come under conservatorship in the first quarter of next year. It offered the parcel at $14 million, well below assessed value, in exchange for a fast and quiet close. It advised the buyer not to contact the owner directly, as the owner was unreliable, and that all communications should go through Trevor as the owner's representative. The owner's representative, a title he had invented for himself. I set the email down. James was watching me. Rebecca was watching me. Mag was watching me. He used the word unreliable, I said. Yes, Mag said. About me. Yes. I looked out the window at the Charles River. There is a particular coldness that settles in when a thing you suspected becomes a thing you know. Suspicion allows for the possibility of being wrong. Knowledge does not. Is there a woman? I said. Mag reached into her folder and produced a single photograph. A man in a dark jacket and a woman with light hair, coming out of a restaurant on Newberry Street. Trevor. The woman was perhaps 30, well-dressed, smiling at something he had just said. Her name is Ashley Brooks, Mag said. She works for him. Has been for 2 years. I looked at the photograph for a moment. Then I set it face down on the table. Friday, I said. I want everything ready by Friday morning. Full documentation, full asset map, full sequence. Mag nodded. James nodded. Rebecca was already writing. I stood at the window and looked down at the city. Somewhere out there. Trevor Whitmore was sitting in his rented office telling himself the hard part was almost over, that the old man was fading, that the land and the money and the future were almost within reach. He had no idea that the land already had a plan, and so did I. Friday came the way the important days always come, quietly and without ceremony, arriving like every other morning, gray and without announcement. I was already dressed when the satellite phone buzzed at 7:42. It was Mag. Come in at 9, she said. Rebecca has the full package, and Walter, prepare yourself. I took the bus. The transformation in the elevator, the Patek on my wrist. The 23rd floor. This time there were 2 additional people in the conference room. One was a man I did not know, perhaps 40 years old, with the anonymous, watchful look of someone who spent his professional life not being noticed. Mag introduced him only as Crane. He worked for a firm Mag had used for 15 years. The other was Rebecca, who had been there since 7 and had already arranged the conference table into a kind of map of Trevor Whitmore's life, documents sorted into labeled sections with the care of someone who understood that truth is useless unless organized. I sat down. I did not reach for the coffee. All of it, I said. Mag nodded to Rebecca, who began. The Ashley Brooks section came first. Ashley was 32 years old. She had a degree in accounting from Northeastern and had been employed by Whitmore Capital Partners for 26 months. She lived in a 1-bedroom apartment on West Broadway in South Boston. Her rent was $4,000 a month, paid by an automatic transfer from a Whitmore Capital operating account, listed in the company's books as research and development consulting. $4,000 a month, I said. For 2 years. $96,000, Rebecca confirmed. Plus meals, gifts, and 2 hotel stays in the Caribbean, billed as client entertainment. Total expenditure on Ashley Brooks over 26 months comes to approximately $160,000. Crane slid a folder across the table. Inside were photographs taken outside restaurants, outside the apartment on West Broadway, and outside a boutique hotel on Commonwealth Avenue. In the most recent photograph, Trevor was holding the door of a taxi open for Ashley. He was smiling the way men smile when they believe no one is watching. I closed the folder. "The 380 from Caroline's Trust," I said. "Walk me through the full flow." Rebecca turned to a flow chart that traced the money from the moment it left Caroline's trust account through 3 intermediate LLC shells before arriving, in pieces, in Trevor's personal checking account and the operating account of Whitmore Capital. Of the $380,000, $212,000 had gone towards servicing the debt from the Florida project. $60,000 had been used to fund the Ashley arrangement in its early months. The remaining $108,000 had been spent on the business of Trevor's life. The wardrobe, the restaurant bills, the lease payments on the Porsche. He spent $108,000 on himself, I said. In 11 months. Rebecca said. I thought about Caroline standing at the kitchen counter with her back to me. I thought about the careful way she had held the knife. The cheerfulness she maintained with the diligence of someone who had been maintaining it for a very long time without knowing exactly what she was maintaining it against. Is there any indication Caroline knew where this money came from? I asked. None, Mag said. We have reviewed her personal banking records, her communications, and her clinic financials. She has no awareness of the trust withdrawals. As far as her records show, the trust is intact. Trevor has been generating false quarterly statements and sending them to an email address he created in her name. I sat with that for a moment. He had forged not just her signature, but her silence. He had built a fiction of her financial security and sent it to her 4 times a year so she would have no reason to look further. The Healy wire, I said. Confirmed, Rebecca said. $75,000 wired from the Delaware LLC on September 18th. Healy deposited it in a personal account the same day. His attorney contacted the Massachusetts Medical Board's investigative office on Wednesday morning, which tells me he has been expecting this conversation for some time and has decided that cooperation is his best option. He will turn on Trevor, Mag said. It was not a question. Without hesitation, Rebecca agreed. Crane spoke for the first time. He had a low, even voice. The Tampa investors have located Trevor. We picked up a communication 2 days ago indicating they know he is in Newton. They have not made contact yet. That may change within the week. I looked at Crane. Are my daughter and granddaughter at risk? Not directly, Crane said. These are businessmen, not criminals in the street sense. They want their money. They will go to Trevor. But if Trevor panics and does something erratic, the secondary risk to people around him increases. Then we move before he panics, I said. I stood and walked to the window. The river was dark and flat below. A single scull moved upstream against the current. The oarsman's strokes steady and even, the blade catching light on each pull. I had spent the week collecting the full picture of what my son-in-law had done. I had wanted to be certain before I acted. I was certain. Monday morning, I said. 9 o'clock. We execute the full sequence. All of it, Mag asked. All of it. Mag made a note. Rebecca began organizing papers. Crane closed his folder and stood to leave. I stayed at the window a moment longer. The skull had passed out of sight around the bend of the river. The water was still again. I had one more evening to play the part of a retired man living quietly on the sufferance of his son-in-law. One more dinner. One more performance. And then the curtain would come down, not on me, but on the man who had decided I was worth less than the land my son was buried on. I took the elevator down. I put on the cardigan. I put on the wool cap. The bus home left at 11:30. The weekend passed without incident, which is to say it passed the way weekends in that house always passed. Trevor watched college football and ordered takeout he did not offer to share. Caroline worked a half day at the clinic on Saturday and spent the afternoon cutting back the hydrangeas before the first hard freeze. Maddie did homework at the kitchen table, earbuds in, occasionally glancing up at me with a look I had learned to read as both question and reassurance. I read my book. I played my part. Sunday I went to 8 o'clock Mass at St. Catherine's, which I had done every Sunday for 30 years. I am not a particularly religious man, but Eleanor had been, and the habit was hers. And the silence in that church before the service began was the cleanest silence I knew. Father Doyle, who was 81 and had known me since before Caroline was born, gave his homily about the patience of small things. Seeds in winter soil, roots that move through stone so slowly you cannot see it happening, but cannot stop it either. I thought he might have been talking to me specifically. I did not ask. Monday morning. Trevor slept in. I was in the kitchen when he came down at 7:40, freshly showered, jacket over his arm. He poured coffee without speaking. He checked his phone. He did not say good morning. The door to the study at the end of the hall was not fully closed. He had been in there since 10 o'clock the previous night. I had heard him. The creak of his chair, the low murmur of his voice, the clink of ice in a glass. He had come out at midnight and gone upstairs without looking toward the guest room. I waited until I heard the Porsche back out of the driveway. Then I walked to the study. The door swung in on a room that had been mine for 20 years before it became his. I had designed this room myself, chosen the window placement for morning light, specified the shelving depth for large format folios. Every wall in this house had been a deliberate decision. Trevor had never known that. He had walked into a world someone else had measured and called it his own. My reference library, 4 decades of architectural folios and engineering texts, was still on the shelves because Trevor had not thought to remove it, and I had not asked. He had added a framed hotel gift shop skyline print, a golf tournament trophy, and a bottle of bourbon half gone beside the monitor. I did not go to the desk first. I went to the printer on the side table near the window, where a short stack of papers sat in the output tray. The top sheet was a printed email on Beacon Coastline letterhead. I read it where it lay without touching it. Raymond Foss was confirming a meeting with Stephen Hartwell for Wednesday of the following week. The subject line read, Wellfleet parcel buyer terms. Then I went to the desk. A manila folder sat open on the blotter. Inside was a glossy trifold brochure. The cover showed a wide lawn, a colonial-style building, and a garden photographed to look like summer. The logo read, Willow Brook Memory Care. A gentle path forward. I opened it. 3 tiers of accommodation. Trevor had circled one in blue pen. Secure memory wing. Monthly fee $9,500. Features included 24-hour staff supervision, structured daily programming, and controlled access to all indoor and outdoor spaces. I read controlled access twice. Beneath the brochure was a room confirmation. Room 217B, name of resident Walter G. Brennan. Expected admission. November 11th. 11 days away. Behind that was a petition for conservatorship. It named Trevor Whitmore as proposed conservator. It cited the cognitive assessment series conducted by Dr. Patrick Healy as supporting medical evidence. One field remained blank. The signature line for the petitioner's legal representative. And on the top line, already signed, in Caroline's handwriting, was her name. I stood in the study for a long time without moving. I have drawn buildings in which families have lived for 3 generations. I understand load-bearing structures. I understand what happens when you remove a wall that was never meant to come down. Caroline's signature. She had signed the top of a form her husband had put in front of her and told her was for estate planning. And she had trusted him, and her trust had become the legal mechanism by which her father was to be locked away. I took out the satellite phone and photographed every page. Then I replaced everything exactly as I had found it, including the angle of the manila folder on the blotter. I walked back to the kitchen. I poured the rest of my coffee down the drain because it had gone cold. I stood at the window and looked at the maple in the backyard, which had lost almost all of its leaves. The branches were bare and dark against a white sky. 11 days. I picked up the satellite phone and sent Mag a single message. It is worse than I thought. The papers are already drawn. Caroline's signature is on them. Proceed as planned. Monday, 9 o'clock. Do not be late. Then I sat down at the kitchen table and waited for Caroline to come home so I could look at her face and say nothing about any of it. That was the hardest part of the whole week. Not the bus rides. Not standing at an open bus stop in my worn coat while the city moved past. Not even the photograph of Trevor holding a door open for a woman who was not his wife. The hardest part was the kitchen table on Monday morning, with a cup of cold coffee and 11 days on the clock, and my daughter's signature on a piece of paper I was not supposed to have seen. Trevor announced the family dinner on Thursday evening, which gave Caroline 2 days to prepare and gave me 2 days to decide exactly how I intended to play it. I already knew what the dinner was for. He wanted my signature. He had the brochure and the room confirmation and the conservatorship petition with Caroline's name already on the top line. And all he needed now was a squiggle from the old man with the shaking hands. He would dress it in the language of love and necessity, the way men who have decided to discard someone always dress it. Words like care and wellness and difficult but right. I spent Thursday and Friday being more forgetful than usual. I left the gas burner on for 4 minutes after my morning coffee. I asked Caroline twice what day it was. I called Maddie by Eleanor's name at dinner on Friday, which I had not done even once in 16 years, and watched Trevor's eyes flicker with the small, satisfied light of a man whose narrative is assembling itself on schedule. Maddie looked at me for just a moment after that. Then she looked back at her plate. Her restraint was extraordinary for a 16-year-old. Sunday came gray and cold, the kind of November afternoon that makes the inside of a house feel more like a decision than a shelter. Caroline had ordered from an Italian place on Commonwealth Avenue. The good china was out. Eleanor's china. The wine was a Barolo. Trevor had upgraded the occasion. Maddie ate in her room. Trevor had arranged it. He had come to the guest room door that afternoon and told me in a gentle, rehearsed voice that he and Caroline wanted to talk privately. He rested his hand on my shoulder, the way a man rests a hand on the shoulder of someone he has already written off. I put on the cardigan with the patched elbows at the table. Trevor poured the wine before we sat. He filled my glass generously, which was a tell. Men about to deliver news they know you will not like tend to fill the other person's glass first. We ate in the careful, circling way of people building towards something. Trevor talked about a new client in Providence, a distribution contract. Good numbers coming in. None of it was true. Caroline nodded in the right places. She had the look of a woman watching herself from the other side of the room. After the main course, Trevor set down his fork. "Walter," he said, using my name the way the opening of a legal document uses a name. "Caroline and I have been thinking about the future, about what is best for everyone." I let my eyes go a little soft, a little unfocused, the way they had been going at strategic moments for the past 10 days. "We love you," Caroline said. Her hands were in her lap, which meant she was holding them together. "We want what is best for you. Dr. Healy has been very clear," Trevor said. "The markers he identified are consistent with early progression. He says that with the right environment, the right support structure, people can maintain quality of life for much longer. We found a place, Walter, Willowbrook. We would like you to consider it." He slid the brochure across the table. The same brochure I had photographed 6 days ago, now positioned as though it were a gift. I picked it up. I turned it over in my hands with the slow care of a man encountering it for the first time. I let my eyes move across the photographs of the garden, the dining room, the residence in the afternoon sunlight. "It looks very nice," I said. Trevor and Caroline exchanged a glance. They had expected resistance. My acceptance, even tentative, was disrupting their script. "It is supposed to be excellent," Trevor said, recovering. "Top-rated in the state. Your own room, a garden, people your own age." "We would visit every week," Caroline said. "Every Sunday, without fail." I set the brochure down on the table. "It is a large decision," I said. "Could I have a few days? I would like to speak with Father Doyle first." A flicker moved across Trevor's face. Calculation. He had wanted the signature tonight. Father Doyle was an inconvenience he had not accounted for. A witness who would ask what Walter was signing and whether Walter understood what he was signing. "Of course," he said, smoothly. "Of course, Walter. Take your time." "Friday," I said. "I will give you my answer by Friday." I would give him his answer on Monday. He did not need to know that yet. Caroline reached across the table and put her hand over mine. Her eyes were wet. She believed what she had been told about Healy's assessment. She believed she was doing the loving thing. That was the cruelest part of what Trevor had done to her. Not the money, not Ashley, not the lies. He had turned her love for me into the instrument of my undoing, and she had never felt the edge of it. I turned my hand over beneath hers and held it for a moment. Then I excused myself and went to my room. I sat on the edge of the bed and listened to the wind move through the bare maples outside, and thought about the distance between the man at that dinner table and the man I was going to be in 36 hours. At 11:15, I sent Mag one final message. All confirmed. Execute Monday. 9 o'clock sharp. Leave Caroline a soft landing. Her reply came back in under a minute. Understood. Soft for her. Scorched for him. I put the satellite phone in the drawer. I lay back on the bed in the dark. My son-in-law had given me a deadline and I had accepted it. What he did not know, and would not know until it was already done, was that his deadline and mine were not the same deadline at all. I left the house at 5 in the morning, before anyone was awake. I had found the spare key to the Volvo the previous Wednesday, in the back of the drawer beneath the ceramic dish where Trevor had taken the others. He had missed it because it was on a plain metal ring with no fob. the kind of key that looks like it belongs to something unimportant. I had kept it in the inside pocket of my cardigan since then without telling anyone. I dressed in the dark. Wool trousers. The heavy fisherman's sweater Eleanor had bought me in Nova Scotia. The old waxed jacket I had not worn in years. Work clothes. Not performance clothes. I took the photograph of Eleanor from the nightstand and put it in my breast pocket. Then I went out to the Volvo. The engine turned over on the second try. I backed out slowly, without the headlights, and did not turn them on until I was 2 blocks from the house. Route 6 to the Cape is 2.5 hours from Newton in light traffic. I drove it the way I had driven it 100 times before, not thinking about the road, not thinking about Monday, letting the highway unspool and the sky lighten in stages from black to deep blue to the flat gray of a November morning on the water. I stopped once for gas in Wareham and drank a paper cup of coffee that tasted of nothing and everything at once. I reached Wellfleet at 7:30. The parking area at the end of the dirt road was empty. I pulled in and sat for a moment with the engine off, listening to the ticking of the cooling metal and the distant movement of water. Then I got out. The marsh in November is a different thing from the marsh in summer. The grasses have gone to bronze and silver, bent flat by the season, and the water between them is the color of pewter. The air smells of salt and cold mud and something older than either. The particular smell of a place that has been doing what it does for longer than anyone alive can remember. I walked for 20 minutes before I reached the place. It is not marked. There is no stone, no plaque, no arrangement of any kind. It is simply a low point in the land where the marsh grass gives way to a narrow tidal channel, and beyond the channel a strip of beach, and beyond the beach the open Atlantic. I have come here every July for 35 years. I know it by the shape of a particular bend in the channel, and by the sound the water makes when the tide is going out. Daniel was 7 years old. He had been wearing a red life vest we bought at the Cape Cod Marine Supply in Provincetown the week before. Eleanor was reading in the beach chair 10 yards behind me. I had turned to cut the watermelon. 15 seconds. 20 at most. The wave came from the northwest, higher than anything the locals could remember for a July day. I heard Eleanor shout his name. I ran. I reached the water. I swam until the Coast Guard boat came alongside me and the officer told me to stop. I did not stop. He told me again. It took 2 men to pull me out. They found Daniel the next morning, 800 meters north along the shoreline. I stood at the edge of the channel and looked out at the water and held my son in my mind, the way I had held him in my arms on the morning he was born, 38 years ago, in a hospital in Boston that has since been torn down and replaced with condominiums. I took Eleanor's photograph from my breast pocket. I held it facing the water for a moment. She had never come back here. I came for both of us. After a while, I took out the satellite phone. "Mag," I said when she answered. "I am adding one more line to Monday's protocol. Before the bank. Before anything else. Tell me," she said. "I want to sign the transfer of the Wellfleet parcel to a conservation trust. Permanent. Irrevocable. In Daniel's name." Mag was quiet for a moment. She had known me for 23 years. She had drafted the original deed. She knew what this land was. "I will have the papers ready by 10, she said. "Drive safely, Walter." I put the phone in my pocket. A great blue heron rose from the grass on the far side of the channel, climbing the cold air with the slow, absolute patience of something that has never needed to hurry. It cleared the tree line and disappeared. Eleanor used to say that herons carry the souls of children who never grew old. I have never been a religious man in the formal sense, but I have never once argued with a heron. I stood there a while longer. The tide was going out. The channel was narrowing. The sound of the water changed as it always changes at low tide, becoming quieter and more deliberate, as though the ocean itself were choosing its words with care. Then I walked back to the Volvo. I changed into the charcoal suit at a rest area on Route 3, hanging the waxed jacket on the hook above the rear door and knotting the Hermes tie in the visor mirror, the Patek on my wrist. The shoes I kept in the small bag behind the passenger seat. By the time I reached the city, the man who had stood at the edge of the tidal channel was already somewhere else. What remained was the man who had built half of Boston and was about to dismantle one very small part of what he had built by mistake. I had made one last visit to the only grave my son had ever had. Now I was going to work. The conference room on the 23rd floor had a view of the Charles River that I had never tired of in 23 years. I had stood at that window in good times and in bad, and the river had always looked the same, moving with the same indifferent purpose it had moved with for 10,000 years before I arrived, and would move with for 10,000 years after I was gone. There is something steadying about that. If you are the kind of person who finds steadiness in being reminded of your own scale. It was 9 o'clock exactly when I sat at the head of the table. Mag was to my left, her legal pad open, pen uncapped. James Okafor to my right, laptop open, connected to the secure terminal at First Hanover Trust. Rebecca Chen across from James, binder open to the first tab. George Ainsworth, regional president of First Hanover, sat 3 chairs down with the careful posture of a man who understood that he was not in charge of this meeting. A young analyst named Daniel Park sat at the far end, fingers resting on a keyboard. I noticed the analyst's name when Mag introduced him. Daniel. I did not say anything about it. I noted it in the quiet drawer and moved on. Before we begin, I said, I need to sign something. Mag slid the Conservation Trust document across the table. 4 pages, clean, unambiguous. The Wellfleet parcel, 12 acres, transferred in perpetuity to the Daniel Brennan Salt Marsh Preserve, administered by the Massachusetts Land Trust Coalition. Irrevocable. No sale, no development, no transfer to any private party. Ever. I read it once. Then I signed it. Mag notarized it immediately. Rebecca witnessed. James witnessed. Daniel Park witnessed without knowing whose name was on the document or what it meant. I placed the signed document to one side. Now, I said. Begin. Daniel Park brought the account structure up on the wall screen. Trevor's world, laid out like a blueprint. Each box a pool of money, each line a flow between them. Architecture is largely the art of making invisible systems visible. This was the same principle applied to the anatomy of a theft. Accounts first, I said. The first box changed from green to red. Trevor's primary checking account at First Hanover. Frozen. Pending fraud review. Inaccessible. Credit facilities, I said. 2 more boxes changed. The Whitmore Capital operating line of credit. Trevor's personal visa. Both red. Both terminated. Not suspended. Reported fraudulent. If Trevor tried to use either card in the next 5 minutes, the terminal would keep it. The Porsche lease, I said. Rebecca made a call. 30 seconds. Repo order issued. GPS shows the vehicle at Tremont and Stewart. Team is en route. I thought about the squeak of those leather brogues on the kitchen floor. I thought about Trevor lifting the Volvo keys from the ceramic dish. The Willowbrook contract, I said. Filed a complaint this morning with the Attorney General's Elder Affairs Division, Mag said. The conservatorship petition is now flagged as disputed. Willowbrook has been notified that room 217B is subject to legal hold. They will not accept that admission. Healy, I said. License suspended Friday afternoon, Rebecca said. His attorney filed a cooperation agreement with the medical board and the Suffolk County DA this morning. Full testimony in exchange for reduced exposure. The civil suit, I said. Mag slid the document across. 38 pages, filed in Suffolk County Superior Court at 8:59. Walter Brennan as plaintiff against Trevor Whitmore. Fraud. Breach of fiduciary duty. Conversion. Elder financial abuse. $380,000 actual damages, plus punitive, plus fees. The press statement, I said. Ready. We release at 2 o'clock. The Globe has been notified. The headline will reference a fraud complaint against Whitmore Capital Partners. It will not name you. It never names me, I said. It never names you. Rebecca confirmed. I looked at the screen. Most of the boxes were red. Trevor's financial world, which had been green and apparently healthy 20 minutes ago, looked like a patient on a monitor whose vital signs had stopped cooperating. One more item. The house, I said. Mag placed the last document on the table. The Newton property, owned by Brennan Holdings, LLC, subsidiary of the trust. Trevor and Caroline were tenants at will, occupying at the pleasure of the trustee. As of 9:17 this morning, that pleasure had been withdrawn. Notice to vacate, effective in 24 hours, to be served by process server at 4 o'clock. Caroline, I said. The notice names both of them as required by law, Mag said. But I have prepared a separate letter for Caroline explaining that the trust transfers the property to her name as sole beneficiary effective upon Trevor's departure. She will not lose the house. She will gain it. Make sure she gets that letter before the process server arrives, I said. Not after. Hand-delivered at 3:30, Mag said. Before, I nodded. I looked at the screen one more time. The red boxes, the severed lines, the small, tidy map of a man's undoing. Then I stood. Thank you, I said to the room. All of you. George Ainsworth looked up from his legal pad. Walter, is there anything else? I picked up the signed conservation trust document and held it for a moment. Yes, I said. This goes to the Massachusetts Land Trust Coalition today. Hand delivery. Make sure someone signs for it. He nodded. I walked to the elevator. The doors opened. I stepped in and turned to face the room one last time through the closing gap. The river was still moving behind the glass. It always was. I did not go to Trevor's office immediately after leaving the bank. I went to a diner on Washington Street, where I had been eating breakfast on Monday mornings for 30 years. The counter stools were the same red vinyl, repaired in 3 places with silver tape. The coffee came in a white ceramic mug with a chip on the handle. I ordered eggs and toast and ate slowly. I read the morning paper from front to back. I did not check my phone. A man at the counter was arguing quietly with someone on a call about money owed. His voice low and tired. I thought about how many conversations in this city were about money owed, and how few of them ended the way the person owed had imagined. At 10:45, I took a cab to the Back Bay. Whitmore Capital Partners occupied Suite 914 in a building on Boylston Street that I owned through a holding company Trevor had never thought to investigate. The shared reception area was staffed by a young woman who was applying lip gloss when I stepped off the elevator. She looked up. I was wearing the charcoal suit. She recalibrated. "Can I help you? I am here to see Mr. Whitmore." "Do you have an appointment?" "I do not," I said. "But I own the building, so I expect he will see me." She put the lip gloss away. Trevor was not in the office. His door was open and his desk was empty. His assistant told me Mr. Whitmore had gone for a coffee and was expected back shortly. I sat in the waiting area and read a 6-month-old copy of Architectural Digest. At 11:03, my phone buzzed. A notification from the alert service Rebecca had configured. Transaction attempt. Merchant a coffee shop on Newberry Street. Card Whitmore Capital Corporate Visa. Status declined. Account closed. 2 minutes later, same merchant. Personal Visa. Declined. Reported fraudulent. 1 minute after that. Personal debit. Declined. Insufficient funds. I put the phone back in my pocket. At 11:17, I heard the elevator open. I heard the particular squeak of leather brogues that had not yet been broken in. Then Trevor appeared in the waiting area doorway, holding a paper coffee cup, his tie slightly crooked, his face the color of old chalk. He saw me. He stood there recalibrating the way a man recalibrates when the thing in front of him does not match any category his mind has prepared for. "Walter," he said, "what are you doing here?" "Sitting," I said. I was in the neighborhood. He looked at the suit, at the Patek on my wrist, at the way I was sitting with the posture of a man who had designed the building and knew the load tolerances of every floor. "Why don't we use your office?" I said. He stood aside. I walked past him and sat in the client chair across from the desk. The correct chair for what I was about to say. I waited while he came around and sat in his own seat with the uncertain movements of a man who was no longer sure it belonged to him. "Trevor," I said, "you called my heart medication a luxury." He opened his mouth. "Well, you took my car keys," I said, "because you said gasoline was a resource that should go to people who brought value. You took the key to my desk. You turned the thermostat to 60 degrees and told me not to waste electricity." "Walter, I can explain. I am not asking you to explain. I am telling you what happened so that you understand what is about to happen." I placed 3 documents on the desk. The civil complaint, the conservatorship fraud notification from the Attorney General's office, and the eviction notice for the Newton property, which the process server had logged as delivered at 4 o'clock. He picked up the top document. His hands were not steady. I watched him read. I watched the color drain from his face in stages, the way paint thins when you add water to it, until what remained was something almost transparent. "The accounts," he said, barely a sentence. "Closed," I said. "The cards. Terminated. Reported fraudulent. The house belongs to Caroline as of today. You have 24 hours. He set the document down. He sat without moving, without speaking. The office was quiet except for traffic below and the faint hum of the building ventilation. The same system I had specified when I renovated this floor in 2012. He looked at the bourbon on the shelf behind the monitor. I could see him calculating whether to reach for it. "Walter," he said, "I can fix this. Give me 2 weeks. I can put the money back. I can explain to Caroline. I just need, a man your age should be grateful. Trevor," I said. He stopped. "That is what you told me. At dinner, over the ribeye. You told me a man my age should be grateful for whatever he had, and that I should stop expecting more." I stood. "Consider this my attempt to follow your advice." I walked out of the office, past his assistant's desk, past the shared receptionist, and into the elevator. The doors closed. I descended 9 floors and walked through the lobby of my own building and out onto Boylston Street. The November air was cold and clean. Somewhere above me, in a chair that no longer belonged to him, my son-in-law was holding 3 pieces of paper and finally understanding that the thing he had been standing on was not the ground. I flagged a cab. I had one more stop to make. The one more stop was Caroline's dental clinic in Brookline. I had called ahead from the cab. Her receptionist, a woman named Gloria who had been with Caroline for 9 years and who sent me a Christmas card every year without fail, told me that Dr. Brennan Whitmore had a patient in the chair until 1 o'clock, but would be free after that. I told Gloria not to say I was coming. I arrived at 12:50 and sat in the waiting room, which smelled of mint and the particular chemical freshness of a dental office. I thought about what I was going to say. The patient came out at 1:15. Caroline appeared at the inner door a moment later, still in her white coat, pulling off her exam gloves. She saw me. She stopped. I had not been to her clinic in 3 years. It had simply happened the way absences happen when people mistake proximity for closeness. She looked at me the way you look at something you are trying to categorize quickly. The suit, the patek, the posture, the absence of the cardigan. "Daddy," she said. "What are you? Why are you dressed like that?" "Can we use your office?" I said. Her office was a small room behind the reception desk, with a window onto the parking lot, framed degrees on the wall, a photograph of Maddie at 8 years old on the Cape, squinting into the sun. I had taken that photograph. I sat in the patient chair across from her desk, the same way I had sat in the client chair in Trevor's office 2 hours earlier. Caroline sat behind the desk and looked at me. "Something has happened," she said. It was not a question. "Yes," I said. I told her. I went in order, the way you walk through a building's structural problems, from the foundation upward. I told her about the transfer from her trust account, the $380,000 that had been moved 11 months ago by a man who had forged her electronic signature on the withdrawal request. I told her about the Florida project, the $1.8 million lost to a hurricane and bad judgment, and a developer who had defaulted twice before. I told her about Ashley Brooks and the apartment in South Boston paid for under the label of research consulting. I told her about Dr. Healy, the $75,000, the cognitive assessment series that had never taken place, and room 217B at Willowbrook, reserved in her father's name for November 11th. Caroline sat very still while I talked. She did not interrupt. She did not cry. Not yet. She had the face of a woman running a fast internal calculation against years of accumulated trust. When I finished, the room was quiet. "How long have you known?" she said. I began to suspect last spring. I said, I have known for certain for 2 weeks. The money, she said. The trust. The house. The firm. A pause. Who are you, Daddy? I am your father, I said. Who I have always been. The rest I can explain tonight if you are ready. The papers are filed. The accounts are frozen. The house is yours, fully and legally, as of this afternoon. Trevor has 24 hours. She looked at her hands on the desk. Healy diagnosed you, she said quietly. He told me the markers were consistent with early-stage cognitive decline. He showed me charts. He had a folder with your name on it. He had a folder with my name on it. I agreed. He also had $75,000 of Trevor's money in a personal account by the end of the same week. She sat with that. I signed something, she said. Trevor said it was estate planning. He put it in front of me during breakfast in August and said it was a standard form, and I signed it without reading it because... She stopped. Because you trusted him, I said. Because I trusted him. She said it the way people say things they are hearing for the first time, even when they have said them before. The signature will not be used against you, I said. Mag has already filed the challenge. The form is void. Caroline was quiet for a moment. Then she looked up at me, and what I saw in her face was not the careful, maintained composure of the woman who had stood at the kitchen counter with her back turned. It was something rawer than that, something that had been waiting behind the composure for a long time. Did you know, she said, when you came to live with us, did you already know what he was? No, I said. I suspected he was careless with money. I did not know he was willing to be careless with you. She nodded once. Then she got up from behind the desk and walked around it and stood in front of me. And I stood up. And she put her arms around me the way she had not done since the year her mother died, and held on. I held her back. Outside the window, a car pulled into the parking lot and pulled out again. The world continued to transact its ordinary business. What do I do now? She said, against my shoulder. Tonight, I said. You take Maddie to the Liberty Hotel downtown. There is a room reserved in your maiden name. I will meet you there at 8. We will talk. And then, tomorrow, we will begin the part that comes after. She pulled back and looked at me. Your maiden name, she said. Brennan, I said. It is a good name. It has held up well. She almost laughed. It was a small and tired sound. But it was real. And it was hers. And it was the first unguarded thing I had heard from her in longer than I could clearly remember. I left the clinic at 2:15. Outside, I checked my phone. A message from Rebecca. The Globe had run the press statement. Whitmore Capital Partners. Preliminary fraud complaint. 240 words. My name was not in it. It never was. I was back at the 23rd floor by 4 o'clock. The afternoon light had gone flat and gray. Mag was still at the table, working through the paperwork that a day like this generates in volume. She had taken off her suit jacket. In 30 years, I had never seen her do that. It meant the day had been long enough to feel long even to her. She poured me a glass of water without being asked. I sat down. Trevor tried to access the Willowbrook administrator's direct line at 2:47, she said, looking at her notes. He wanted to invoke the conservatorship petition. The administrator told him the petition was under legal review and advised him to contact his attorney. He called his attorney at 2:51. His attorney did not answer. His attorney has been following the Globe story, I said. Yes. He likely has other clients who would prefer not to be associated with a fraud complaint in the morning papers. Mag turned a page. The process server confirmed delivery of the eviction notice at the Newton house at 4:03. Caroline and Maddie were not present. Trevor was. How did he respond? The server described him as agitated but compliant. He did not contest service. He signed the receipt. I thought about Trevor signing a receipt that told him to leave the house he had believed he owned for 5 years. The pen in his hand. Signing his name to something that was ending rather than beginning. I was still thinking about it when the front desk called up. There is a woman in the lobby, the young man said. No appointment. She says her name is Ashley Brooks. She says she has something for Ms. Sullivan. Mag and I looked at each other. Send her up, I said. Ashley Brooks was 32, but the woman who came through the conference room door looked older than that, or simply tired in the way a particular kind of reckoning makes people look. Dark coat, messenger bag, hair pulled back. She had come from somewhere she had been sitting and thinking for several hours. She looked at me. She looked at Mag. She sat down without being invited. He called me this morning, she said. When the card stopped working, he said he was coming to stay at my apartment for a few days while he sorted things out. I told him the locks had been changed. When did you change them? Mag asked. Friday, Ashley said. After your associate dropped off the card. She looked at Mag. You left a business card under my door 3 weeks ago. It said to call if I ever needed a clean exit. I did, Mag confirmed. I should have called 3 weeks ago, Ashley said. She put the messenger bag on the table and unzipped it. Inside was a small digital recorder and a USB drive. She set both on the table between us. I recorded conversations for the last 18 months. Not all of them, but enough. What kind of conversations? I asked. The kind men have when they think no one is paying attention, she said. Trevor talked. At dinner, in the car, in hotel rooms when he thought I was asleep. About the money, about the house, about you. She looked directly at me. About you quite a lot. I did not say anything. Mag reached across the table and picked up the USB drive. She turned it in her fingers. We will need you to testify if it goes to trial, Mag said. And a sworn statement to the DA. Your name will appear in the filings, likely in the press. Ashley was quiet for a moment. She looked at the table. I was not a good person in this situation, she said. I knew he was married. I knew he had a family. I told myself it was not my problem. She paused. It was my problem. I know that now. Why are you here? I said. She looked at me. Her eyes were steady. Because he sat across from me at dinner 3 months ago and told me that once you were gone, and he meant really gone, the money would be clean and the future was clear. He said it like you were an item on a list. Something to be moved from pending to completed. She pushed the recorder toward me. You have a granddaughter. She has been sitting at dinner with a man planning to erase her grandfather. She did not know it. I did. The room was quiet. 18 months of a man's private speech, collected by a woman who had stayed in a bad situation long enough to understand its full shape. Not a noble story. but an honest one, which is rarer. Thank you, Ashley, I said. She stood. She picked up her bag. At the door, she stopped and turned. Mr. Brennan, your daughter? Is she going to be all right? She is going to be better than all right, I said. It will take time. But she will be. Ashley nodded. She left. Mag waited until the elevator doors had closed before she picked up the USB drive again. Transcribe tonight, she said. Relevant excerpts to the DA in the morning with Healy's cooperation agreement. Mag set the drive down and looked at me. It is over, Walter. Everything that needed to be done today has been done. I know, I said. I am going to the Liberty Hotel to have dinner with my daughter and my granddaughter. I stood. It has been some time since I have done that. Yes, Mag said. It has. I put on my coat and took the elevator down. Outside on Newbury Street, the first stars were appearing in the places where the clouds had thinned. I stood on the sidewalk a moment and let the cold come in. Then I flagged a cab to the Liberty Hotel, where my daughter was waiting, and where the part that comes after was about to begin. The Liberty Hotel was an old jail converted into something beautiful, which I had always found appropriate for Boston. The lobby smelled of cut flowers, and a fire burned in the far fireplace. I stood in the entrance a moment and let the warmth settle before I looked for them. Caroline and Maddie were at a corner table near the window, the one that looked out at the lights on Cambridge Street. Caroline had changed into a dark sweater, her hair pulled back. She looked like herself, which was something I had not seen in some time. The self she showed at the dinner table in Newton had been a performance, and performance wears the features down. Maddie was beside her with a Coke and a basket of bread. She stood up when I came in, the way young people used to when their elders arrived at the table. We ate proper dinner. Pasta for Maddie, sea bass for Carolyn, a small filet and a glass of Bordeaux for me. We talked about things that were not the events of the day, because what was needed was the kind of conversation that reminds people they exist outside their crises. Maddie told me about a history project on the Boston subway system. She had opinions about the engineering decisions better formed than most I had heard from students twice her age. Caroline told me about an elderly patient who sang hymns quietly to himself throughout his appointments, and had been doing so for 11 years. We laughed. It was a real laugh, not a managed one. After dinner, we moved to the sitting area near the fire. Caroline ordered tea. Maddie excused herself, and Caroline and I sat in the quiet that is different from the quiet of people with nothing to say, and different again from those with too much. I have been thinking, Caroline said, about how long you must have known, about the patience it takes to sit at that table every Sunday and say nothing. It was not patience, I said. It was uncertainty. I needed to be sure before I moved, and I needed to know which side of it you were on. Which side was I on? She was on the wrong side without knowing it, I said. That is the only kind that matters. She was quiet for a moment. Daddy, she said, I have a lot of questions. About the firm, about the trust, about who you actually are, and I would like to ask them, but not tonight. Tonight, I said. We are just having dinner. Yes, she said. We are. Maddie came back. She sat down across from me and folded her hands on the table in a way that meant she had been thinking about something. Grandpa, she said, I have something for you. She reached into her jacket pocket and took out a cream-colored envelope, sealed, with my name in her handwriting. She set it on the table and left her hand on it a moment before sliding it toward me. I opened it carefully. Inside was a letter, 7 pages front and back, dated from February through last month. Dates and observations in the careful handwriting of a 16-year-old who had understood from the beginning that what she was witnessing would require documentation. I read the first entry, February 12th. Dad on phone in study. Heard when the old man's gone. Wellfleet is worth 14 million minimum. Did not recognize the other voice. Writing it down because it did not feel like something I should forget. I looked up at Maddie. She was watching me the way she had at the first Sunday dinner. But there was something new in her face now. Relief. The relief of a person who has been carrying something alone for a long time and has finally put it down. How long? I said. I started writing in February, she said. But I have known something was wrong since last spring. Dad gets loud on the phone when he thinks I have my earbuds in. The invoice, I said. The Healy invoice in the trash. I put it on your desk, she said. I found it looking for a stapler. I thought you would know what it meant. A pause. You did. I did, I said. Did you know what I was doing? She said. Not until the invoice, I said. After that, I began to see it. The texts. The way you looked at me at dinner. I set the letter down. You were very careful. I was scared, she said. I was scared that if I said anything directly, he would send me somewhere. He threatened that once, last summer. I said something I should not have said, and he told me that if I did not keep my mouth shut, he would find a boarding school in New Hampshire where I could practice keeping it. I looked at my granddaughter, 16 years old, 9 months in a house with a man who had threatened her into silence, documenting everything in a cream-colored envelope, waiting for the moment when it was safe to hand it over. I thought about Eleanor. She would have said nothing. She would have simply looked at me over the rim of her teacup with the expression she reserved for moments when things had gone exactly as they were supposed to go. I folded the letter and put it in the breast pocket of my suit jacket, next to Eleanor's photograph. Maddie, I said. Yes. You have your great-grandmother's handwriting, I said. She would have been very proud of you. Maddie picked up her Coke and looked at the fire. In the way the light was falling, she looked so much like Eleanor at 16 that I had to look away. Caroline reached across the table and took my hand on one side and Maddie's on the other. The fire burned. The city moved outside the window. The three of us sat together in the warm light and said nothing for a while, which was exactly right. We drove to Newton the next morning, the three of us, in Caroline's car. It was a cold, clear Tuesday, the kind of November day that makes no apologies. The sky was a hard blue. The frost on the front lawn was still white at 9, which meant the sun had not yet reached it. Mag was already on the sidewalk when we pulled in. Beside her stood Frank Delgado and another man, both in dark jackets. Frank had the posture of a man who had spent years in rooms where projecting calm was more useful than projecting force. Trevor's car was not in the driveway. The Porsche was gone, of course, repossessed. But the driveway was empty in a way that felt more complete than that. The way a room feels empty when the person who used to live in it has left. The door was answered on the second knock. Trevor opened it in yesterday's clothes. He had not shaved. His eyes had the flatness that comes after tiredness, when there is nothing left to feel but the raw fact of where you are and how you got there. He looked at Caroline first, then at Maddie, then at me, then at Mag and Frank and the man beside Frank. "Caroline," he said. His voice had changed. The practiced smoothness was gone. What remained was something younger and less finished. The voice of a man who had lost the instrument he used to perform with and was speaking for the first time without it. Caroline stood very straight. "Trevor, you have until 11 o'clock. Frank will stay with you while you pack. You may take your clothing, your personal papers, and anything that was yours before we were married. Nothing else." Trevor looked at Frank. Frank looked back at him with the polite, impersonal attention of a man with a job to do. "The watches," Trevor said. "The Rolex in the study." "The Rolex was purchased on the Whitmore Capital corporate card 14 months ago," Mag said, "without heat. It is subject to the asset recovery order. It stays." Trevor's jaw tightened. He looked at me. "Walter," he said, "I had thought about this moment. I had considered silence. I had considered a sentence that carried the full weight of everything the week had contained. What I said was this: Trevor, I hope the 7 years are useful." He stared at me. "The DA," I said. "Healy's cooperation agreement was submitted this morning. Ashley's recordings follow. Your attorney, if he has any sense, will advise you to negotiate quickly. 7 years is the estimate Mag gave me for a plea on 4 counts. It may be less if you cooperate. It may be more if you do not." Trevor looked at Caroline. She did not look away from him, which was its own kind of answer. "I did not plan for it to go this far," he said. "To her. Not to me. I want you to know that. I know." Caroline said, "I also know that you paid a doctor to have my father declared incompetent. That you had a room reserved at a memory care facility for him, and that you had been paying rent on another woman's apartment for 2 years. Those things were not an accident of going too far. They were decisions." She paused. "I hope the time is useful for you too, Trevor. I genuinely do. But do not call us. Do not write to Maddie. If you have something to say to me eventually, send it through Mag." Trevor stood in the doorway for a moment, with nowhere to put the things she had just said. Then he stepped back. Frank stepped forward. The morning proceeded. I walked through the house while Trevor packed, not to supervise, but because there were things I wanted to see one last time before the spaces changed. The kitchen with its window over the backyard, the study, where my reference library was still on the shelves, the guest room, which had been my room, which had a bay window that caught the morning light and would, in a few weeks, be something else. I stood in the guest room for a moment. The small suitcase I had packed when I half expected to be sent to Sunnyvale was still there on the floor. I had packed it as evidence, not as a plan. I left it where it was. At 11:05, Trevor walked out the front door with 2 suitcases and a cardboard box. He did not look back at the house. He put his things in a taxi, and the taxi pulled out of the driveway. And he was gone. The 3 of us stood on the front lawn in the cold morning air. The frost had melted by now. The grass was green and wet and ordinary. Maddie took out her phone. She took a photograph of the house, then of me and Caroline standing in front of it. "For the record," she said. Caroline took my arm. "What do we do with the study?" She said. "I think we should put up different shelves," I said. "Ones that are the right depth for the books that are already on them. Caroline looked at me for a moment. Then she understood. Then she laughed. A real laugh. Not a managed one. And it sounded like Eleanor. And the November air was cold, and the sky was hard blue, and everything that had been in the wrong place was beginning, slowly and without ceremony, to move back to where it belonged. The weeks that followed had the quality of a house after a storm. Not calm, exactly, but this quiet that comes after something loud has stopped, when you are still listening for it and finding only air. Caroline took 2 weeks off from the clinic. She spent the first week in the house in Newton with Maddie, going through rooms, deciding what stayed and what went. Trevor had taken little. The suits and shirts he had charged to accounts he did not own had been seized under the asset recovery order. What remained was a half-empty rail and a pair of dress shoes he had left behind. Possibly by accident, Maddie went back to school on Thursday. She texted me every day, short texts, a single sentence, things she had noticed. I answered every one. Mag called me with updates in the mornings. Trevor had retained a criminal defense attorney, a man named Felker, who had a reputation for negotiating hard on the front end and accepting whatever was offered on the back. Healy had finalized his cooperation agreement. Ashley had given her sworn statement to the DA on Wednesday and had reportedly been composed throughout, which did not surprise me. The asset recovery process was moving through the courts at the pace such things move, which is to say slowly, but moving. As for Trevor himself, I knew where he was because Crane's firm had continued to observe at my request, and because what they observed was worth knowing. He had lasted 2 nights at a hotel on Boylston Street before the room charge came back declined. The last active card he had from a joint account Caroline had not yet closed. She closed it on Wednesday, calmly, as a matter of administration. Trevor had then moved to a motor inn on Route 9 near Framingham called the Crawford Inn, which took cash and did not ask many questions. He had paid for 3 nights in advance with the last physical cash he had, $240, which was almost exactly the amount of the pharmacy receipt he had slapped down on the dinner table 10 days earlier. I noticed that, but I did not say it to anyone. At the Crawford Inn, Trevor called people. Crane's report listed 23 outgoing calls in the first 48 hours. His mother, who had not spoken to him in 3 years and did not speak to him now. 2 former business associates from the Florida project, both of whom let the calls go to voicemail. A man in Tampa whose name appeared on no public record, but who Crane identified through secondary means as one of the investors Trevor had been unable to repay. That call connected. It lasted 4 minutes. After it, Trevor did not make any calls for the rest of the day. On the 3rd day, a car sat in the Crawford Inn parking lot for 40 minutes without anyone getting out, then left. Crane photographed the plates. They traced to a company in Tampa. I read that report in the kitchen of the Cape House on a Wednesday morning, with Atlas the cat on the chair across from me and a cup of coffee going cold at my elbow. I thought about calling Mag. Then I decided against it. Trevor had made the Tampa investors his problem long before he made them mine. I had extracted the people I cared about from his radius. What happened now between Trevor and the consequences he had assembled over 3 years was not my responsibility. And pretending otherwise would have been a kind of arrogance I had spent a lifetime trying to avoid. I doubled Caroline and Maddie's security detail instead, quietly, without telling them. They did not need to know that someone was watching the perimeter of their house in Newton. They needed to know only that the perimeter was safe, which it was. I called Mag about something else. The Globe piece, I said. There is a follow-up reporter calling Rebecca about the Conservation Trust. I want to handle that carefully. Handle it how? Mag asked. The Daniel Brennan Salt Marsh Preserve should be announced properly. I said. Not as a footnote to a fraud story. Separately, its own story. With the right framing. Mag was quiet for a moment. The Massachusetts Land Trust Coalition has been asking about a public ceremony. They said the preserve is significant. 12 acres of salt marsh at Wellfleet, irrevocably protected. They want to mark it. In the summer, I said. When the marsh looks like itself. Not in the cold. July. Mag said. July. I said. I put the phone down and looked out the window of the Cape house at the November sky, the color of pewter, and at the bare trees on the edge of the property, and at the narrow strip of water visible between them where the marsh met the land. Somewhere out there, beneath the silver surface of the tidal channel, the world was continuing to do what it had always done. The tides moved. The birds came and went. The marsh held what it held. In Newton, Caroline was measuring the study for new shelves. In Boston, Trevor was 3 days behind on a motor-in room he had paid for in cash. In Wellfleet, 12 acres of salt marsh had a name. The story was not over. Exactly. Stories are not the kind of thing that end the way buildings do. With a final inspection and a certificate of occupancy. They continue in the people who carry them. They continue in the way those people set a table, or answer a phone, or decide whether to look back when they walk out a door. But this particular chapter of it was done. What came next would be written in a different hand. July was 7 months away. I had time. January came to Wellfleet the way January always comes to the Outer Cape. Without apology and without softening. The wind off the Atlantic carried a cold that was honest rather than cruel. The cold of a place that has no interest in being comfortable and does not pretend otherwise. I had been living in the Cape house for 6 weeks and had stopped noticing it. The way you stop noticing the sound of the ocean. I was in the kitchen at 7 in the morning when the call came. It was a number I did not recognize, with a Boston exchange, which meant a payphone or a borrowed phone or a prepaid. I let it ring once. Then I picked up. Walter, stripped of its former instruments. No performance, no smoothness. It is Trevor. Please do not hang up. I looked out the kitchen window at the marsh. The light at that hour in January was a pale, thin gold. The kind of light that does not warm anything but illuminates everything. Atlas was on the chair. My coffee was hot. I am listening, I said. I heard a highway in the background. The persistent sound of trucks. He was somewhere without a door to close. I need to say something, he said. I am not asking for anything. I just need to say it. Then say it. I never knew my father, Trevor said. He left when I was 4. My mother worked 2 jobs and she was tired. Always tired. And I grew up mostly by myself, which is not an excuse for anything. I know that. But I want you to understand the context, because it matters for what I am trying to say. I waited. When I married Caroline, he said. I sat at your table and I thought, here is a man who has built something, instead of trying to earn it or be part of it in any honest way. I resented it. I spent 15 years telling myself the money was owed to me because I had sat at your table and given your daughter a life. He stopped. That was not a reason. It was a justification. I know the difference now. 15 years of Sunday dinners. 15 years of a man calculating what he was owed. The Alzheimer plan, I said. The room at Willowbrook. You understand what that was? Yes, he said. Say it. A silence. Then, quietly, I was going to put you somewhere you would not come back from. I told myself it was for your own good. It was not for your own good. It was for mine. The honesty of it landed the way honesty lands when it has been a long time coming. Not lightly. Trevor, what do you want me to say to that? Nothing. I am not looking for absolution. I just needed to say it out loud to someone who deserved to hear it. I thought about something Eleanor had told me in the last year of her life. She had said that the hardest thing about dying was not the dying. It was discovering, at the end, which of the things you had held onto were worth holding and which were only weight. Trevor, I said, I have one question for you. Yes, the day you took my car keys, you knew what it would mean for me to walk to the bus stop in the rain. You knew my knee. You knew the weather. Did you know what you were doing? A long silence. Yes, he said. I knew. I nodded, though he could not see it. Thank you for telling me the truth about that. I would rather know. Walter, will Caroline ever... Trevor. I stopped him gently. You already know the answer to that question, and asking it of me is not the right way to seek it. If there is ever anything to be said between you and Caroline, it will have to travel the distance on its own. I cannot carry it for either of you. He was quiet for a long time. Okay, he said finally. It was a small word, but he said it as though he meant it, which was not the way he had used to say things. Trevor, I said. You told me once that a man my age should be grateful for what he had. I remember. I have been thinking about that. You were not entirely wrong. Gratitude is the correct posture. You had the target right and the object wrong. You told me to be grateful for very little. I am suggesting you try being grateful for whatever you have left. I paused. You are not old. You have a mind, if you use it honestly. You have the possibility of a life that does not require the theft of someone else's. That is not nothing. Trevor did not answer for a moment. Then he said, I will try. Good, I said. Do not call this number again. If there is ever something to be said, send it through Mag. Okay, he said again. Goodbye, Trevor. He said goodbye. I put the phone down on the kitchen counter. Outside the window, the pale January light was shifting as the sun climbed. A great blue heron was standing at the edge of the tidal channel, absolutely still, in the way herons stand when they are content to simply be where they are without needing it to be anything else. I picked up my coffee. It was still warm. In 3 weeks, Caroline and Maddie were coming to the Cape for a long weekend. Maddie had already asked if she could help design the sign for the preserve entrance, the small bronze plaque that would mark the path in from the road. She had been researching typography. She had sent me 3 options in a text message, each one more considered than the last. I had written back with a single word, the same word I had sent her from a bus stop in Newton on a cold October morning, when the week had just begun and the path through it had not yet been clear. Soon. The sign was Maddie's. She had researched 6 typefaces before settling on one, a serif she described as dignified, without being stiff, which I thought was exactly right. The letters were cast in bronze and set into Vermont granite at the entrance to the path, at a height that a person of average height could read without bending. It said, "The Daniel Brennan Salt Marsh Preserve. 12 acres held in perpetual trust. In memory of Daniel Brennan, 1982 to 1989. What the ocean takes, the land remembers." That last line was Maddie's too. She had sent it to me in March with a note that said simply, "I thought this might be right. Let me know." I had written back one word. Perfect. The ceremony was small, which was how I had wanted it. July in Wellfleet is bright and salt-smelling and windy in the best way. The kind of day that makes you understand why people have always been drawn to the outer Cape, to the edge of things, to the places where the land runs out and the water begins. The Massachusetts Land Trust Coalition sent Dana, a young woman who knew the marsh better than anyone, and spoke about it with the kind of love that does not need to announce itself. James Okafor came from Boston. Rebecca Chen came. Mag came, which I had not expected, and stood at the back with her hands clasped and her face doing the particular thing it does when she approves of something but does not intend to say so. Caroline stood beside me. She had her hair down, which she rarely wore it in summer. She was wearing a blue dress that had been Eleanor's, altered to fit, which she had not told me about until we arrived, and I recognized it. I did not say anything. She took my hand and did not let go. Maddie stood on my other side with a camera borrowed from the school photography club, documenting everything with the care of a girl who understood that some things are worth keeping a record of. Dana spoke briefly. I spoke briefly. I said that the land had belonged to our family since before Daniel was born, and that after today, it would belong to no one family, which was a different kind of belonging and a better one. I said that my son had never had a stone or a marker, and that what we were doing today was not closing that wound, but giving it a shape, which is sometimes all a wound will accept. Caroline squeezed my hand. Then Dana placed the official Land Trust dedication plaque beside the granite sign, and we all stood quietly for a moment in the July wind, looking out at the marsh. And it was enough. Afterward, the 4 of us walked to the end of the path and stood at the edge of the tidal channel where I had knelt in November. The water was high and moving, the summer light catching it in 1,000 places at once. A family of Canada geese moved in single file along the far shore. Somewhere in the grass, an invisible bird was making a sound of pure, uncomplicated happiness. Maddie crouched at the water's edge and picked up a small, flat stone. She held it for a moment, then set it back down on the bank. She did not throw it. She just set it down, carefully, on the edge of the water, which struck me as exactly right. Caroline looked at me. "What were you thinking just now?" "I was thinking," I said, "that your mother would have said something very simple, and it would have been the best thing anyone said all day." "What would she have said?" I thought about it. She would have said, "Well, there it is." Caroline laughed. A real laugh. And it sounded like Eleanor, and the July wind came off the water. And that was all. If you have stayed with me until the end of this story, I want to leave you with something that is not a lesson, because lessons have a way of making people feel managed, and that is not what I am after. What I want to leave you with is a question, not the one you might expect, Not the question about money or power or what you would do if you were in my position. Those questions are interesting, but they are not the important one. The important one is this: who is sitting at your table tonight? And do they know who you are? I spent 10 years being invisible in a house I had built because I believed that silence was the same as safety, and that letting others believe what they wanted to believe about me was the same as peace. I was wrong about both of those things. Silence is not safety, it is permission. And peace that requires you to disappear from your own life is not peace at all. It is a very slow erasure. What I have now is not complicated. A house on the Cape, a daughter who calls me on Sunday mornings, a granddaughter who sends me typography research at 10 o'clock at night, a cat named Atlas who has never once agreed with anything I have said, a marsh that holds my son's name in its water and its grass and its light. It is enough. It is more than enough. It is everything. A man my age should be grateful. Trevor told me. He was right. He just did not know what to be grateful for. I do. If this story reached you tonight, leave a word in the comments. Just one word. The first one that comes to you. Not for me. For the person at your own table who might need to hear that it is not too late to stop being invisible in the life they have already built. Thank you for staying with me. And if you would like more stories about people who decided late in the game that they were still worth knowing, stay close. There are more. Walter carried 3 losses through that autumn: his son, his wife, and the 10 years he had given away to silence. What he found at the end of it was not replacement for those losses. Nothing replaces what the ocean takes. What he found was that the people still living were ready to know him, and that knowing them in return, fully and without performance, was the only inheritance worth leaving.